Originally, this video had a much longer intro, but it was sort of unnecessary and boring, so here are the main points. I used to make games in RPG Maker. RPG Maker doesn't really require coding. This comes at the cost of RPG Maker being a limited tool in ways. This doesn't mean it's a bad tool. These incredible games were all made in RPG Maker, and you should still go check out my RPG Maker puzzle game, Backspace, on Steam. However, I wanted to learn a more powerful engine so that I could make whatever games I wanted, and not be bound by the limitations of RPG Maker. However, I was absolutely horrified of coding, and it just seemed completely impossible to ever begin to learn. However, now I've nearly finished my first game in Godot, and I wanted to document the process of how I learned everything I needed, and how I made the game, partly just for the sake of documenting it, partly to promote the game, but also partly to help motivate people who are currently in the position I was previously in, where you want to make games, but learning to code seems completely overwhelming. I am by absolutely no means an expert. In fact, I'd still call myself a beginner, but starting stuff like this is hard, and I think I have some useful experience to share on specifically starting. Anyway, let's get into it. Also, I'm Casey, by the way. At some point during the development of my last game, Backspace, I decided that after I finished that project, I wanted to learn Godot. Why Godot? Because it's the engine this guy uses, and I like his games. And I guess I had heard good things about it, I think. I don't really remember. Godot is the only engine I've used besides RPG Maker, so I don't really have any point of comparison when I say this, but I've really loved my experience with Godot. There's great documentation, a great community around it, and it's been really fun and easy to a degree to learn. Also, it's free. I got started by downloading Godot and reading the documentation on the website on how to use it, which basically immediately directs you to this other site called GD Quest, encouraging you to take their course on learning GD script, which is the main language that Godot uses. And this course was incredible. I had essentially zero programming knowledge before taking this course, and was absolutely terrified of it, but this course breaks it down and teaches you the basics in a way that makes it fun and actually comprehensible. It only took me a couple days to get through, and at the end of each of my sessions I recorded a video myself where I tried to explain what I learned, and I think that helped. I didn't retain all the material this course teaches you, but this is how I learned enough about coding to just get started. As for the rest of the documentation on Godot's website, I did not read. I watched some YouTube videos on the basics of Godot's interface, and then I pretty much just went rogue, and honestly for me, I think that was the best idea. I feel like when learning stuff like this, if I just stockpile a bunch of information about everything into my brain and then I try to use it, I learn a bunch of stuff I don't immediately need, which I of course forget before I use it, and that stuff just clogs up my brain so that I forget the stuff I actually do need. What works for me and the way I began learning Godot goes like this, and I'm gonna use lighting as an example. 1, I want to learn how to use lighting in Godot. 2, I watch videos and or read documentation on how to use lighting in Godot. 3, I implement and troubleshoot lighting in my project, and by troubleshoot I mean fuck it up and figure out what I did wrong until it works. And basically I just did this process for everything I needed to learn for my first project. I feel like this way of actively trying to figure out and implement a specific thing in my own project makes the knowledge way more memorable to me than if it was just the 12th thing I read about in a massive list of documentation. Also, this way you slowly build up a mental network of knowledge on all the stuff you actually need to know for what you want to make, rather than just trying to cram everything into your brain. Anyway, after I finished the GD Quest course, I basically immediately started my first game. I wanted to start with something simple, but also something I actually wanted to make into a full game, and I feel like I pretty luckily stumbled into a perfect idea for me. I may be insane or some kind of masochist because I have a huge soft spot for the game Desert Bus. If you're unfamiliar, it's a game where you drive in a straight line for 8 real hours. The bus pulls slightly to the right, so you can't just hold down the acceleration, you have to be constantly keeping it on the road. Yeah, I love this game. For some reason, driving super long distances in games while listening to music or a podcast, or especially talking to friends who are making the journey with me, it's like one of my favorite things to do in a game. However, I must admit, Desert Bus is just a little too much for me. Because of that, I've always wanted to make a game that was like Desert Bus, but just a little more interesting to look at, and a little less than 8 hours. And you know, Desert Bus is about as simple as a game can be, me in the past thought. Past me also thought a game like Desert Bus would be perfect for incrementally adding features onto. Perhaps as I learned new things. Yeah, it was pretty perfect. So it was decided I was gonna make the first ever Desert Bus-like. or like second, I don't know, I found this game on Steam. So I started a new project in Godot, and oh my god, this is terrifying, but we're gonna make it through this. The first thing I needed to do was to make a bus HUD that couldn't drive back and forth on the road, so I threw together some crappy little temporary assets and I put them into the game. Making the bus move was a terrifying journey, and the success of it I completely owe to the GD Quest Discord server, which I highly recommend you join if you want to learn Godot. They've saved me in many times of crisis. Speaking of completely owing the success of my code, 99% of my coding mysteries and horrors have been solved by the same guy in the GD Quest server who has probably devoted 10,000 hours to helping me specifically. Thank you, Sniffy. I think that's how I say your name. Anyway, the bus moves now. And to be honest, I still don't entirely understand how it works. I mean, like, if I look at it, I mostly understand, and I think I could mostly correctly explain how it works. You may be wondering how I sleep at night knowing I couldn't recreate the movement system in my own game, but here's how I do. The way I've wrapped my head around most things in Godot is by using them multiple times and slowly getting a feel for them, like these green $sign things. I remember seeing these for the first time and being absolutely horrified because I didn't know what it was or what it meant or how it worked, and sometimes it was a percent and I didn't know why. But after enough tutorials I followed used them, I figured that all out. Through this process, I've come to understand nearly all the code in my game, and I can write a bunch of stuff all by myself. Thing is, this is the only project I've ever made in Godot at the moment, and thus I've only implemented a movement system the one time, so my brain just hasn't really had the chance to sink its teeth into the concept, and I don't like imagining the idea of a brain with teeth. Side note, unscripted future Casey here. At the time of recording this, I actually have started a new project in Godot, and I'm happy to say, I understand the movement system now, because I did one on my own. So, this is a motivational story. The next thing I needed to implement was the drifting. In Desert Bus, your bus always drifts to the right, but I knew I wanted the vehicle in my game to be able to drift in either direction, so whenever you let go of the movement controls, the game picks a random value, 1 or -1, and that determines the direction. I got a bunch of help on this from Sniffy again, but I do remember there was some big part of getting it to work that I managed to figure out myself, and that was a huge confidence boost for me. Wish I could remember what it was, but it has been a bit since then. I added some hitboxes on the edges of the road and to the player so that the game can detect when you run off the road. I added a steering wheel that reacts to which direction you're pressing, and I added a label that displays how long until you reach your destination. You aren't actually going anywhere, which is pretty clear right now. Functionally, you're just keeping a slowly drifting box from colliding with stationary boxes on either side of you until a timer runs out. But later on, I add a bunch of stuff to create the illusion that you're driving forward. And later is now, I made the bus bob up and down. Okay, that doesn't help that much, but I swear it looks good later. Regardless, we have a desert bus-like. You gotta drive in a straight line, correcting for the vehicle's drift until you reach your destination. From here, we can start turning this into an actual original game instead of just a shittier version of Desert Bus. And yeah, if you thought Desert Bus was the worst game ever, I present to you Casey Bus, although you can drift in 2 directions now. Anyway, that's it for this devlog. Next time we'll pretty this game up and add some new mechanics and actually turn it into Jovian Drive. So check out my game Backspace on Steam, Wishlist Jovian Drive on Steam, and thank you for watching.